The crisp autumn air carried a hint of change as students filed into Brooksville High School on that fateful Monday morning. Among them was Jamal Stevenson, a bright-eyed teenager with a quiet demeanor that belied his sharp intellect. As he made his way through the bustling hallways, the weight of his father's words echoed in his mind. Work hard, rise above, and always stay true to yourself. It was a mantra that had guided him through the challenges of being the son of Mayor Jamal Harris, a man respected throughout the community for his unwavering integrity and fair leadership. Jamal slipped into his seat in Mr. Donnelly's history class, the familiar scent of chalk dust and old textbooks filling his nostrils. He pulled out his meticulously organized notebook, a testament to his dedication to his studies. Around him, his classmates chattered about weekend adventures and upcoming exams, but Jamal remained focused, his mind already engaged with the day's lesson. Mr. Donnelly, a man whose wrinkled face seemed to carry the weight of decades of teaching, stood at the front of the room. His steely gaze swept over the class, a silent command for order that immediately hushed the students. Jamal couldn't help but notice the way Mr. Donnelly's eyes lingered a fraction longer on the students of color, a subtle gesture that spoke volumes about the biases lurking beneath the surface. As the lesson on the Civil War began, Jamal found himself captivated by the intricate web of historical events unfolding before him. He had spent the previous night poring over additional resources, driven by a thirst for knowledge that extended far beyond the confines of their textbook. His hand shot up, eager to contribute to the discussion with a question that had been gnawing at him. "Yes, Mr. Stevenson." Mr. Donnelly's voice carried a hint of exasperation, as if Jamal's enthusiasm was an unwelcome interruption rather than a sign of engagement. Undeterred, Jamal spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the now silent classroom. "I was wondering about the economic factors that contributed to the North's industrialization. How much of their success can be attributed to their industrial capacity compared to the South's reliance on agriculture, especially slavery?" The question hung in the air, a testament to Jamal's thoughtful analysis and genuine curiosity. For a moment, a flicker of surprise crossed Mr. Donnelly's face, quickly replaced by a sneer that sent a chill down Jamal's spine. Well, Mr. Stevenson." Mr. Donnelly's voice dripped with sarcasm. "It seems we have quite the historian in our midst. Perhaps you'd like to come up here and teach the class instead." The words cut through the air, sharp and cruel, eliciting uncomfortable snickers from some students and looks of sympathy from others. Jamal felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment, but he held his ground, maintaining eye contact with Mr. Donnelly even as his heart raced. He had faced subtle discrimination before, but never so blatantly, never in front of his peers. Mr. Donnelly wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a condescending drawl. "Maybe, Mr. Stevenson, you should spend less time trying to be smart and more time focusing on what's actually in the textbook. Not every theory from the internet is worth bringing up in class." The words hit Jamal like a physical blow. He blinked rapidly, fighting back the sting of tears that threatened to well up in his eyes. Around him, the classroom had grown painfully quiet, the tension palpable as students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react to such a blatant display of disrespect. Jamal's mind raced, replaying his father's words about rising above challenges. But how could he rise above this? How could he maintain his dignity in the face of such unwarranted hostility? He took a deep breath, centering himself, and made a conscious decision not to let Mr. Donnelly see how deeply his words had wounded him. As Mr. Donnelly turned back to the board, continuing his lecture as if nothing had happened, Jamal sat perfectly still, his posture rigid and his eyes fixed straight ahead. He barely heard the rest of the lesson, his mind a whirlwind of emotions and questions. Why had Mr. Donnelly singled him out? Was it because of the color of his skin, or was there something more to it? The rest of the class passed in a blur. Jamal mechanically took notes, his pen moving across the page more out of habit than conscious thought. He was acutely aware of the occasional glances from his classmates, some sympathetic, others curious, and a few even seemed amused by his public humiliation. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Jamal slowly packed his things. He felt drained, as if the brief exchange with Mr. Donnelly had sapped all his energy. As he stood to leave, he caught the eye of Sarah, a kind-hearted classmate who had always been friendly to him. "That was really unfair, Jamal," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously to make sure Mr. Donnelly wasn't within earshot. "Your question was good. Donnelly's just, you know." Jamal managed a tight smile, appreciating her support, but not trusting himself to speak. He knew exactly what she meant. Everyone knew about Mr. Donnelly's history of targeting students of color, but it was always spoken of in hushed tones, never directly addressed. As he walked out of the classroom, Jamal's mind was made up. He wouldn't let this incident slide. He couldn't. Not just for himself, but for every student who had ever felt belittled or dismissed because of their race. His father had always taught him about the importance of standing up for what was right. And now, Jamal realized, it was time to put those lessons into action. The hallway bustled with activity as students rushed to their next classes, but Jamal moved slowly, lost in thought. He knew that confronting this issue wouldn't be easy. Mr. Donnelly was a long-standing fixture at Brooksville High, and challenging him meant potentially facing backlash, not just from the teacher, but from an administration that might be reluctant to rock the boat. But as Jamal thought about his father, Mayor Jamal Harris, a man who had faced his own share of discrimination on his path to leadership, he felt a surge of determination. He was more than just a student. He was the son of a man who had taught him the value of integrity and the power of speaking truth to power. With each step down the hallway, Jamal's resolve strengthened. He would not let Mr. Donnelly's words define him. Instead, he would use this experience as a catalyst for change. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but Jamal Stevenson was ready to take the first step towards confronting the subtle racism that had gone unchecked for far too long at Brooksville High. The rest of the day passed in a haze for Jamal. He moved from class to class, his body on autopilot while his mind replayed the incident in Mr. Donnelly's classroom over and over. The sting of humiliation lingered, a constant reminder of the unfairness he had faced. In each class, he found himself hyper-aware of his surroundings, scrutinizing every interaction for hints of bias or prejudice. During lunch, Jamal sat with his usual group of friends, but he remained uncharacteristically quiet. His friends, sensing something was off, tried to engage him in conversation, but Jamal's responses were brief and distracted. He couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him, that whispers were following him through the hallways. "Hey, Jamal, you okay?" his friend Marcus asked, concern evident in his voice. "You've barely touched your food." Jamal looked up, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking about some stuff." Marcus exchanged a glance with their other friends, clearly not buying Jamal's attempt at nonchalance. "Is this about what happened in Donnelly's class? Sarah told me he was being a real jerk to you." Jamal felt a flash of irritation at the realization that word had spread so quickly, but he pushed it down. Of course people would talk. It wasn't every day that a teacher so blatantly disrespected a student, especially not the son of the mayor. "It's not a big deal," Jamal said, trying to sound convincing. "Donnelly's always been tough." "Tough is one thing," piped up Aisha, another friend at the table. "What he did was straight up racist, Jamal. You should report him." Jamal shook his head, his resolve from earlier wavering in the face of potential conflict. "And say what? That he hurt my feelings? It's not like he used a slur or anything. He'd just say he was being challenging, or some BS like that." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Jamal remained lost in thought. He couldn't help but wonder how many other students had faced similar treatment from Mr. Here, how many had stayed silent, believing that speaking up wouldn't make a difference. A bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Jamal felt a mix of relief and dread. Relief to be leaving the charged atmosphere of the schools, above rage at the thought of facing his parents. How had happened without worrying them? His father had enough on his plate as mayor. He didn't need to be burdened with Jamal's problems at school. Walking home, Jamal took a longer route than usual, using the extra time to gather his thoughts. The autumn leaves crunched beneath his feet, a rhythmic sound that helped calm his racing mind. He thought about his father's journey, the obstacles he had overcome to become mayor. Surely, he had faced far worse than what Jamal had experienced today. The thought both comforted and challenged him. If his father could rise above such adversity, shouldn't he be able to handle one prejudiced teacher? As Jamal approached his house, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for the inevitable questions about his day. He knew his parents had an uncanny ability to sense when something was bothering him, and today would be no exception. Stepping inside, Jamal was greeted by the warm aroma of his mother's cooking. The familiar scent of spices and simmering stew usually brought comfort, but today, it only served to heighten his anxiety. He could hear his parents' voices drifting from the kitchen, engaged in casual conversation. "Jamal, is that you?" his mother called out. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour." "Okay, Mom," Jamal replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've got some homework to do. I'll be in my room." He hurried upstairs before his parents could see his face, afraid that his expression might betray the turmoil he was feeling. In the safety of his room, Jamal dropped his backpack and flopped onto his bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence of his room was a stark contrast to the chaos in his mind. He thought about Mr. Donnelly's sneering face, the barely concealed contempt in his voice. He thought about the uncomfortable silence that had fallen over the classroom, the way his classmates had averted their eyes, unwilling or unable to speak up. Jamal sat up, reaching for his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered searching for information about dealing with discriminatory teachers. But something held him back. What if his parents saw his search history? What if word got back to the school somehow? Instead, he pulled out his history textbook, flipping to the chapter on the Civil War. His eyes scanned the pages, but the words blurred together. All he could hear was Mr. Donnelly's voice, mocking and dismissive. "Maybe you should spend less time trying to be smart, and more time focusing on what's actually in the textbook." The irony wasn't lost on Jamal. Here he was, doing exactly what Mr. Donnelly had suggested, yet it felt hollow, like a surrender to the very prejudice he wanted to fight against. Time seemed to crawl as Jamal waited for dinner, alternating between attempting to study and losing himself in thought. When his mother finally called him down to eat, he took a moment to compose himself, practicing a neutral expression in the mirror before heading downstairs. The dining room was warm and inviting, the table set with care. Jamal's father, Mayor Harris, was already seated, his tie loosened after a long day at City Hall. His mother, Vanessa, was bringing the last of the dishes to the table, her face brightening as Jamal entered the room. "There you are," she said warmly. "I was beginning to think you'd fallen asleep up there." Jamal managed a small smile as he took his seat. "Just caught up in homework," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. As they began to eat, Jamal's father launched into a story about his day, detailing a particularly challenging city council meeting. Jamal listened half-heartedly, pushing food around his plate more than eating it. It didn't take long for Mayor Harris to notice his son's unusual behavior. Pausing mid-sentence, he fixed Jamal with a concerned look. "Jamal, is everything okay? You've barely touched your food." Jamal froze, feeling the weight of his parents' keel gazes. He wanted to brush it off, to say everything was fine, but the words stuck in his throat. The events of the day, the hurt and anger he'd been holding back, suddenly felt too big to contain. It's Mr. Donnelly," Jamal began, his voice barely above a whisper. And with that, the dam broke. Words poured out of him as he recounted the incident in class, the humiliation he'd felt, and the silent aftermath that had followed him throughout the day. As he spoke, Jamal saw a range of emotions flicker across his parents' faces: concern, anger, and a deep, pained understanding. When he finally fell silent, the quiet that settled over the dining room was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Mayor Harris was the first to break the silence, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Jamal, I'm so sorry you had to go through that. What Mr. Donnelly did was wrong. And it's not the first time I've heard complaints about his behavior." Jamal looked up, surprised. "You've heard about him before?" His father nodded gravely. "There have been murmurs, but nothing formal, which makes it difficult to act. Teachers like Donnelly often hide behind years of service and a facade of tough love. But this isn't about tough love. This is about respect." Vanessa reached across the table, squeezing Jamal's hand. "Your father's right. No one has the right to make you feel inferior, especially not because of your skin color." Jamal felt a surge of emotion, relief at finally sharing his burden, anger at the injustice, and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, something could be done. "What should I do?" he asked, looking between his parents, seeking guidance. Mayor Harris smiled gently, a determined glint in his eye. "We're going to handle this. But first, you should go back to class tomorrow with your head held high. You did nothing wrong, Jamal. Remember that." As the conversation continued, plans being made and strategies discussed, Jamal felt the weight on his shoulders begin to lift. The uncomfortable silence that had plagued him throughout the day was replaced by the warm, supportive voices of his family. For the first time since Mr. Donnelly's class, Jamal felt a spark of hope. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't be facing it alone. The fight against prejudice was far from over, but with his family behind him, Jamal felt ready to take on the challenge, one step at a time. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the turbulent emotions swirling within Jamal as he prepared for school. He moved through his morning routine mechanically, his mind replaying the conversation with his parents from the night before. Their support had bolstered his spirits, but the prospect of facing Mr. Donnelly again left a knot of anxiety in his stomach. As Jamal descended the stairs, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and toast filled the air. He found his father, Mayor Jamal Harris, sitting at the kitchen table, already impeccably dressed in a sharp suit despite the early hour. The mayor looked up from his tablet, offering Jamal a warm smile that didn't quite mask the concern in his eyes. "Good morning, son," Mayor Harris said, gesturing for Jamal to join him. "How are you feeling about today?" Jamal slid into a chair, shrugging non-committally. "I'm okay, I guess. Just nervous." Mayor Harris nodded, understanding etched in the lines of his face. He reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Remember what we talked about last night? You have every right to be in that classroom, to ask questions, to learn. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Jamal nodded, drawing strength from his father's words. As he ate his breakfast, Mayor Harris shared stories from his own youth, times when he had faced discrimination and how he had overcome it. With each anecdote, Jamal felt his resolve strengthen. He was more than just a student. He was the son of a man who had fought against injustice his entire life. As Jamal prepared to leave for school, his father stopped him at the door. "Jamal," he said, his voice serious, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. It takes courage to speak up, to stand your ground. Whatever happens today, remember that." With those words echoing in his mind, Jamal made his way to school. The halls of Brooksville High seemed different somehow, as if the events of the previous day had cast everything in a new light. As he walked to his locker, Jamal noticed the curious glances and hushed whispers of his fellow students. Word had clearly spread about the incident in Mr. Donnelly's class. Sarah, the classmate who had offered words of support the day before, approached Jamal with a tentative smile. "Hey, Jamal, how are you doing?" Jamal managed a small smile in return. "I'm okay. Thanks for asking." Sarah hesitated for a moment before continuing, her voice low. "A bunch of us were talking. What Mr. Donnelly did wasn't right. If you decide to do something about it, we've got your back." The support, unexpected but welcome, gave Jamal a boost of confidence as he headed to his first class. Throughout the morning, more students approached him, offering words of encouragement or sharing their own experiences with Mr. Donnelly's biased behavior. With each interaction, Jamal felt less alone, realizing that his stand against injustice was about more than just himself. As the time for history class approached, Jamal felt a mix of dread and determination. He took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders as he entered Mr. Donnelly's classroom. The teacher barely glanced up as Jamal took his seat, but there was a tension in the air, a sense that something had shifted. Throughout the lesson, Jamal remained engaged, taking notes and participating in discussions. When he raised his hand to ask a question, he noticed Mr. Donnelly's hesitation before calling on him. The teacher's tone was curt but not openly hostile, a marked change from the day before. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Jamal felt a sense of accomplishment. He had made it through, holding his head high just as his father had advised. But he knew this was just the beginning. The issue of Mr. Donnelly's behavior needed to be addressed on a larger scale. At home that evening, Jamal found his parents waiting for him in the living room. The serious expressions on their faces told him that this wasn't just a casual family gathering. Mayor Harris gestured for Jamal to take a seat, his voice grave as he began to speak. "Jamal, your mother and I have been discussing the situation with Mr. Donnelly," he said. "We believe it's time to take action, but before we do anything, we want to hear from you. This affects you most directly, and your voice matters in this decision." Jamal felt a surge of emotion at his father's words. It was one thing to be told his voice mattered. It was another to be given the opportunity to truly use it. He took a moment to gather his thoughts before responding. "I don't want this to just be about me," Jamal said slowly. "Today, the administration has been able to ignore the issue." Jamal's mother, Vanessa, leaned forward, her expression serious. "We think it's time to bring this to the school board's attention. Your father, as mayor, has some influence, but we want to approach this carefully. It's not just about punishing one teacher. It's about addressing a systemic problem." As the family discussed their options, Jamal felt a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about standing up to one unfair teacher. It was about making a real change in his school and potentially in the wider community. Mayor Harris outlined a plan to gather testimonies from other students who had experienced discrimination, to present a comprehensive case to the school board. He explained the potential risks and challenges they might face, emphasizing that this wouldn't be an easy fight. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Jamal?" his father asked, his gaze intense. "Once we start this process, there's no turning back. It could get uncomfortable, and there might be people who push back against us." Jamal thought about the support he'd received from his classmates, about the years of unchecked bias that had affected so many students. He thought about his father's journey, the battles he had fought to become mayor and to make a difference in their community. With a deep breath, Jamal nodded. "I'm sure, Dad, this is bigger than just me. If we can make things better for other students, for kids who'll come to Brooksville High in the future, then it's worth it." Mayor Harris smiled, a mix of pride and determination in his expression. "All right then, we'll start putting things in motion tomorrow. But remember, Jamal, no matter what happens, your mother and I are here for you. We're in this together." As the conversation wound down, Jamal felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since the incident with Mr. Donnelly, he felt truly empowered. That night, as Jamal lay in bed, he reflected on the whirlwind of events that had led to this moment. From the humiliation in Mr. Donnelly's class to the decision to take a stand against injustice, it had been a transformative experience. He realized that being the mayor's son wasn't just about living up to his father's reputation. It was about using the privileges and opportunities he had to make a difference. With that thought in mind, Jamal drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever challenges the next day might bring. The fight against prejudice and discrimination was far from over, but with his family's support and his newfound determination, Jamal felt prepared to take on the world, one step at a time. The following day dawned with an electric tension in the air, as if the very atmosphere of Brooksville High School sensed the impending confrontation. Jamal walked through the front doors with his head held high, his father's words of encouragement echoing in his mind. The usual morning chatter seemed muted, replaced by hushed whispers and curious glances as he made his way to his locker. Sarah, who had become something of an ally since the incident, fell into step beside him. "Hey, Jamal," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Is it true? Is your dad really coming to school today?" Jamal nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Yeah, he is, but I'm not sure exactly what's going to happen." As they walked to their first class, Jamal could feel the weight of expectation on his shoulders. He had always been known as the mayor's son, but today, that identity felt more pronounced than ever. Students he barely knew were offering words of support, while others watched from a distance, clearly curious about what was about to unfold. The morning crawled by at an agonizingly slow pace. In each class, Jamal found it difficult to concentrate, his mind constantly wandering to thoughts of what might happen in Mr. Donnelly's history class. When the bell finally rang, signaling the start of the period he had been both dreading and anticipating, Jamal took a deep breath and made his way to the classroom. Mr. Donnelly was already at his desk when Jamal entered, his eyes narrowing slightly as they fell on the teenager. There was a tension in the teacher's posture that hadn't been there before, a wariness that suggested he knew something was amiss. Jamal took his seat, acutely aware of the charged atmosphere in the room. As Mr. Donnelly began the lesson, his voice seemed strained, lacking its usual authoritative tone. He kept glancing at the door, as if expecting an interruption at any moment. Jamal found himself holding his breath, waiting for the confrontation he knew was coming. Halfway through the class, it happened. The door opened, and Principal Watkins stepped in, her expression serious. Behind her stood Mayor Jamal Harris, impeccably dressed in a sharp suit that seemed to command respect without a word being spoken. The room fell into a stunned silence, every student's eyes wide with surprise and anticipation. Mr. Donnelly froze mid-sentence, the color draining from his face as he saw the mayor. His hand, which had been poised to write on the board, slowly lowered as he turned to face the newcomers. "Mr. Donnelly?" Principal Watkins said, her tone formal and clipped. "May we have a word with you?" The teacher nodded stiffly, his eyes darting between the principal, the mayor, and Jamal. As he made his way to the front of the room, whispers erupted among the students, a low buzz of excitement and nervousness. Jamal sat in stunned silence, watching as his father and the principal spoke quietly but intensely with Mr. Donnelly. Though he couldn't hear what was being said, the body language spoke volumes. Mr. Donnelly's shoulders were hunched defensively, while Mayor Harris stood tall, his presence commanding even in hushed conversation. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, Principal Watkins turned to address the class. "Students, we're going to pause the lesson for a moment. Mayor Harris would like to speak to you all." A hush fell over the room as Mayor Harris stepped forward. His gaze swept over the students, lingering for a moment on Jamal, before addressing the class as a whole. Jamal felt a surge of pride and nervousness as his father began to speak. "Good morning, everyone," Mayor Harris began, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of authority that demanded attention. "I'm here today not in my capacity as mayor, but as a parent and a member of this community. Yesterday, an incident occurred in this classroom that goes against everything we stand for as a school and as a society." Jamal could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, but he kept his gaze fixed on his father, drawing strength from the man's unwavering presence. "My son, Jamal, experienced something that no student should have to endure," Mayor Harris continued. "He was disrespected and belittled in front of his peers, not for any wrongdoing, but because of how he was perceived. This is not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that has gone on for far too long." Mr. Donnelly, still standing at the front of the room, opened his mouth as if to protest, but a sharp look from Principal Watkins silenced him. "I want to make something very clear," Mayor Harris said, his voice gaining intensity. "No student in this room, or in this school, should ever be made to feel lesser because of the color of their skin, their background, or any other factor beyond their control. Education is about uplift, about challenging young minds to grow and expand. It is not about tearing students down or reinforcing harmful stereotypes. The mayor's words seemed to resonate through the classroom, and Jamal could see nods of agreement from many of his classmates. Even those who had been ambivalent before seemed moved by the power of his father's speech. "I know that speaking up can be difficult," Mayor Harris continued, his tone softening slightly. "It takes courage to stand against injustice, especially when it comes from those in positions of authority. But I want each and every one of you to know that you have a right to be treated with respect and dignity. If you ever feel that you're being treated unfairly, you have not just the right, but the responsibility to speak up." As Mayor Harris spoke about the importance of creating an inclusive and respectful learning environment, Jamal felt a mix of emotions washing over him. There was pride in his father's words and actions, relief that the issues were finally being addressed, and a growing sense of empowerment. He realized that this moment wasn't just about him or Mr. Donnelly, it was about setting a precedent for how students should be treated and valued. In the coming days, Mayor Harris concluded, there will be changes implemented to ensure that every student in this school feels safe, respected, and empowered to learn. This is not about punishment, but about growth and improvement. We all have a role to play in creating the kind of community we want to live in. As Mayor Harris finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Students who had been silent before were now vocal in their support, and Jamal could see tears in the eyes of some who had likely faced similar treatment in the past. Mr. Donnelly stood rigidly at the front of the class, his face a mix of emotions, shock, anger, and perhaps a glimmer of realization. Principal Watkins stepped forward, informing the class that Mr. Donnelly would be taking a leave of absence while the situation was fully investigated. As Mayor Harris and Principal Watkins prepared to leave, Jamal caught his father's eye. In that moment of shared understanding, Jamal saw not just the public figure of the mayor, but the man who had always taught him to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The rest of the class passed in a blur of excited chatter and speculation. Jamal found himself at the center of attention, receiving words of support and admiration from classmates he had barely spoken to before. But amidst the excitement, he felt a profound sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about one teacher or one incident. It was about changing the culture of the entire school. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Jamal gathered his things slowly, still processing everything that had happened. Sarah approached him, a wide smile on her face. "That was incredible, Jamal," she said, her eyes shining with admiration. "Your dad? Wow. I never thought I'd see something like that happen here." Jamal nodded, still somewhat overwhelmed. "Yeah, it was. Intense. But it needed to happen." As they walked out of the classroom together, Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You know, what you did. Speaking up and getting your dad involved. It's going to change things for a lot of people. You should be proud." Jamal felt a warmth spread through his chest at her words. He realized that this confrontation, as uncomfortable as it had been, was just the beginning. There was still work to be done, minds to be changed, and a school culture to be reshaped. But for the first time, he felt truly empowered to be part of that change. The days following Mayor Harris's intervention at Brooksville High School were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The once quiet halls now buzzed with constant chatter, a mix of excitement, apprehension, and hope permeating the air. For Jamal, it felt as though he was seeing his school through new eyes, noticing dynamics and interactions he had previously overlooked. The morning after the confrontation, Jamal arrived at school to find a crowd of students gathered around the main entrance. As he approached, he could hear snippets of animated conversations. "Did you hear? Donnelly's on administrative leave?" "About time someone stood up to him. Do you think they'll fire him?" Jamal made his way through the throng, acutely aware of the eyes following him. Some students offered words of support or admiration, while others watched from a distance, their expressions a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. It was a stark reminder that while many celebrated the changes, others might be resistant or afraid of the upheaval. As he reached his locker, Sarah appeared at his side, her face alight with excitement. "Jamal, Have you seen the notice? There's going to be an all-school assembly this afternoon to address what happened yesterday. Jamal nodded, trying to keep his expression neutral despite the butterflies in his stomach. Yeah, I heard. My dad mentioned something about it last night. Sarah leaned in, lowering her voice. Is it true that they're bringing in someone to investigate all the complaints against Donnelly? I overheard some teachers talking about it. Before Jamal could respond, the first bell rang, sending students scurrying to their classrooms. As he made his way to his first period, Jamal couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and trepidation. The changes he had set in motion were bigger than he had anticipated, and he wondered what other ripple effects they might have. Throughout the morning, Jamal noticed a marked difference in the way some teachers interacted with students. There was a newfound cautiousness in their tone, a careful consideration in their words that hadn't been there before. In his English class, Ms. Rodriguez even paused mid-lecture to ask if anyone had any questions or concerns about the way she was presenting the material. When it came time for history class, Jamal entered the room with a strange sense of déjà vu. Instead of Mr. Donnelly's imposing presence at the front of the room, a substitute teacher, Mrs. Chen, greeted the class with a warm smile. The atmosphere was noticeably lighter, with students seeming more relaxed and engaged. As Mrs. Chen began the lesson, Jamal found himself more actively participating than he ever had in Mr. Donnelly's class. He raised his hand to ask questions and offer insights, no longer fearing ridicule or dismissal. Other students, too, seemed emboldened, leading to lively discussions that Mrs. Chen encouraged with evident enthusiasm. Midway through the class, Jamal caught sight of Principal Watkins observing from the doorway. She nodded approvingly at the engaged classroom before moving on, leaving Jamal to wonder about the broader changes taking place behind the scenes. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of regular classes, an announcement crackled over the intercom system. All students and faculty, please report to the auditorium for a special assembly. The hallways filled with a nervous energy as students made their way to the large auditorium. Jamal found himself swept along with the crowd, exchanging meaningful glances with Sarah and his other friends as they found seats near the front. Principal Watkins took the stage, her presence commanding immediate silence from the assembled students and staff. She cleared her throat before beginning to speak, her voice firm but compassionate. Good afternoon, everyone. As you're all aware, yesterday we experienced a significant event that has prompted us to take a hard look at the culture and practices within our school. Jamal felt a surge of nerves as all eyes in the auditorium seemed to turn towards him. Principal Watkins continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. I want to be clear. What happened yesterday was not an isolated incident. It was a wake-up call. A moment that forced us to confront issues that have been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. She went on to outline the immediate steps being taken. Mr. Donnelly's administrative leave pending a full investigation. The establishment of a task force to review and improve the school's policies on discrimination and inclusivity. And the introduction of mandatory sensitivity training for all staff members. But this isn't just about policy changes, Principal Watkins emphasized. This is about a fundamental shift in how we treat each other, how we value diversity, and how we create an environment where every student feels safe, respected, and empowered to learn. As the assembly continued, various speakers took the stage, teachers, student representatives, and even a member of the school board. Each spoke about the importance of creating an inclusive environment and the steps they were committed to taking to make it a reality. Jamal listened intently, a mix of emotions swirling within him. He felt proud of the changes being set in motion, but also a weight of responsibility. He knew that many would be looking to him in the coming weeks and months, seeing him as a symbol of this new era at Brooksville High. As the assembly drew to a close, Principal Watkins made a final announcement that sent a ripple of excitement through the auditorium. Lastly, I'm pleased to announce the formation of a new Student Diversity and Inclusion Council. This council will work directly with the administration to ensure that student voices are heard and represented in all our efforts moving forward. We'll be accepting applications from interested students starting tomorrow. The auditorium erupted in applause and excited chatter. As students began to file out, Jamal found himself surrounded by classmates eager to discuss the assembly and the changes ahead. "Are you going to apply for the council, Jamal?" Sarah asked, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. Jamal hesitated, considering the question. "I'm not sure. I want to help. But I don't want people to think I'm just doing it because of what happened with Donnelly." "Are you kidding?" Another classmate, Marcus, chimed in. "Jamal, you're the reason all of this is happening. You should definitely be on that council." As they made their way out of the auditorium, Jamal was struck by the energy and optimism surrounding him. Students who had never spoken to him before were now approaching him, sharing their own stories of discrimination or offering words of support. Outside the school, Jamal spotted his father waiting by the car, a proud smile on his face. As Jamal approached, Mayor Harris pulled him into a warm embrace. "How are you holding up, son?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. Jamal took a deep breath, considering the question. "It's a lot," he admitted. "I never expected all of this when I told you about what happened with Mr. Donnelly." Mayor Harris nodded understandingly. "Change is never easy, Jamal, but it's necessary. What you've started here, it's going to make a real difference in people's lives." As they drove home, Jamal gazed out the window, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would be resistance, setbacks, and challenges to overcome. But he also felt a sense of hope and determination that he had never experienced before. That evening, as Jamal sat at his desk, staring at the blank application form for the Student Diversity and Inclusion Council, he made a decision. He would apply, not because he was the mayor's son, or because of what happened with Mr. Donnelly, but because he truly believed in the change they were trying to create. As he began to fill out the form, Jamal felt a sense of purpose settling over him. The aftermath of the confrontation with Mr. Donnelly wasn't just about punishing one teacher or addressing a single incident. It was about seizing an opportunity to create lasting change, to build a school, and ultimately, a community where everyone felt valued and respected. With renewed determination, Jamal threw himself into crafting his application, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long but important journey. The aftermath of the confrontation had set the stage, but it was up to him and his fellow students to write the next chapter in Brooksville High's story. In the weeks that followed the confrontation with Mr. Donnelly, Brooksville High School underwent a transformation that was both subtle and profound. The initial shock and excitement had given way to a new normal, one where conversations about equity and inclusion were no longer whispered in corners, but discussed openly in classrooms and hallways. For Jamal, this period was a crash course in the complexities of power dynamics and social change. He found himself at the center of a movement he had inadvertently started, navigating the delicate balance between being a symbol of change and just another student trying to finish his homework. One particularly sunny afternoon, as Jamal made his way through the crowded cafeteria, he overheard a group of students discussing the recent changes. "It's like a whole different school now," one girl was saying. "Did you see how Mr. Patterson actually stopped his lecture yesterday to make sure everyone understood before moving on? He never used to do that." "Yeah. And did you hear about the new mentorship program they're starting?" Another chimed in. "It's supposed to pair up upperclassmen with freshmen from different backgrounds. Sounds pretty cool." Jamal couldn't help but smile as he listened. These were exactly the kind of changes he had hoped to see. Small but significant shifts that were making the school a more inclusive place for everyone. As he sat down at his usual table, Sarah slid in next to him, her eyes bright with excitement. "Jamal, did you hear? The results for the Student Diversity and Inclusion Council are out." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He had thrown himself into the application process, pouring his thoughts and experiences into the essay questions. But a part of him had worried that his involvement might be seen as too controversial, given his role in recent events. "And?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sarah's grin widened. "You're in. So am I. They just posted the list outside the main office." A wave of relief and excitement washed over Jamal. He had been chosen not because of who his father was, or because of what had happened with Mr. Donnelly, but because of his genuine commitment to making a difference. As word spread about the council appointments, Jamal found himself approached by students from all walks of life. Some offered congratulations, while others shared their hopes and concerns for the future of the school. "Hey, Jamal," called out Marcus, a fellow junior who Jamal knew from the basketball team. "Congrats on making the council, man. Listen, I was wondering if you could bring something up at your first meeting." Jamal nodded, encouraging Marcus to continue. "It's about the sports teams," Marcus explained. "I've noticed that some of the coaches tend to favor certain players, you know? And it's not always about skill. I think sometimes it's about race." The seriousness of Marcus's tone struck Jamal. He realized that the ripple effects of his stand against Mr. Donnelly had emboldened others to speak up about injustices they had previously accepted as unchangeable. "I'll definitely bring it up," Jamal assured him. "Thanks for telling me, Marcus. This is exactly the kind of thing the council needs to know about." As the days passed, Jamal found himself increasingly aware of the power he now held. Students looked to him not just as the mayor's son or the kid who stood up to Mr. Donnelly, but as someone who could effect real change. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on him, but also one that he was determined to live up to. The first meeting of the Student Diversity and Inclusion Council was an eye-opening experience for Jamal. Seated around a large table in the school library, he looked at the diverse group of students who had been selected alongside him. There was Sarah, of course, but also Aisha, a hijab-wearing senior known for her activism, Carlos, a sophomore who had recently come out as gay, and several others representing various backgrounds and experiences. Principal Watkins opened the meeting, her tone serious but encouraging. "I want to thank each of you for stepping up to be part of this important initiative. Your voices and perspectives are crucial as we work to create a more inclusive and equitable environment here at Brooksville High." As the meeting progressed, Jamal was struck by the depth and breadth of issues his fellow students brought up. From concerns about the lack of diverse literature in the English curriculum to suggestions for more inclusive school events, it was clear that there was no shortage of areas where improvements could be made. When it came time for Jamal to speak, he took a deep breath, remembering all the conversations he'd had with other students over the past weeks. "I think one of the most important things we can do," he began, "is to create more opportunities for open dialogue between students and teachers. A lot of the issues we're facing come from a lack of understanding on both sides." The other council members nodded in agreement, and soon a lively discussion was underway about how to implement such initiatives. As ideas flew back and forth across the table, Jamal felt a growing sense of excitement. This was what real change looked like, not just top-down mandates, but collaborative efforts that took everyone's perspectives into account. As the weeks turned into months, Jamal watched with pride as the initiatives proposed by the council began to take shape. A new peer mediation program was established to help resolve conflicts between students. The Curriculum Review Committee, which now included student representatives, began the process of diversifying the texts and perspectives taught in various subjects. But perhaps the most significant change was in the overall atmosphere of the school. Students who had once felt marginalized or ignored now spoke up in class with confidence. Teachers, having undergone extensive sensitivity training, were more attuned to the diverse needs of their students. One day, as Jamal was leaving a particularly productive council meeting, he ran into Mr. Patterson, his calculus teacher. The older man stopped him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Jamal," Mr. Patterson said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and something that sounded almost like regret. "I wanted to tell you how much I appreciate the work you and the council are doing. It's opened my eyes to a lot of things I never noticed before." Jamal was taken aback by the teacher's candor. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson. That means a lot to hear." The teacher nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, when I first started teaching, I thought being fair meant treating everyone exactly the same. But what you've shown us, it's that true fairness means recognizing and valuing our differences. As Mr. Patterson walked away, Jamal felt a profound sense of the impact his actions had had. It wasn't just about punishing one biased teacher or changing a few policies. It was about shifting the entire culture of the school, opening eyes and minds to new perspectives. Later that evening, as Jamal recounted the day's events to his parents over dinner, his father listened with a proud smile. "And you know, Jamal," Mayor Harris said, setting down his fork, "what you're learning now? About the complexities of power, about how to use your voice to uplift others. These are lessons that will serve you well throughout your life." Jamal nodded, thinking about how much he had grown in the past few months. "It's not always easy," he admitted. "Sometimes it feels like a big responsibility." His mother reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "That's because it is a big responsibility, but you're handling it with grace and wisdom beyond your years." As the conversation continued, touching on the challenges and triumphs of the past months, Jamal realized that he had gained far more than just a seat on a council or a reputation as a changemaker. He had gained a deep understanding of the power of standing up for what's right, of using one's voice not just for personal gain, but for the betterment of the community. The confrontation with Mr. Donnelly, which had seemed so monumental at the time, now felt like just the first step on a much longer journey. Jamal knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more injustices to face and overcome. But he also knew that he was no longer facing them alone. As the school year progressed, Brooksville High settled into a new rhythm, one that pulsed with the energy of positive change and growing awareness. For Jamal, each day brought new challenges and opportunities as he navigated his dual roles as a student and a leader in the school's transformation. One crisp autumn morning, Jamal found himself standing before the school board, his heart racing but his voice steady as he presented the Student Diversity and Inclusion Council's latest proposals. The room was packed with teachers, parents, and community members, all eager to hear about the progress being made at the high school. And so, we believe that implementing these cultural competency workshops for both students and staff will further our goal of creating a truly inclusive learning environment, Jamal concluded, looking out at the attentive faces before him. As he fielded questions from the board members, Jamal couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come since that fateful day in Mr. Donnelly's class. The nervous, self-doubting boy, who had been afraid to speak up, had been replaced by a confident young man who could articulate his ideas clearly and persuasively. After the meeting, as Jamal gathered his notes, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning, he found himself face to face with Mr. Donnelly. The former teacher looked older somehow, the lines on his face deeper than Jamal remembered. "Jamal," Mr. Donnelly said, his voice lacking its former bravado, I owe you an apology." Jamal stood silently, waiting for the man to continue. "What I did to you, and to other students over the years, was wrong," Mr. Donnelly continued. "I've had a lot of time to think since everything happened. And I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." For a moment, Jamal was transported back to that day in the classroom, feeling the sting of humiliation and anger. But as he looked at Mr. Donnelly now, he saw something he hadn't expected: genuine remorse. "Thank you for saying that, Mr. Donnelly," Jamal replied, his voice calm and measured. "I appreciate your apology. I hope that you'll continue to reflect on how your actions affected your students and use that understanding to grow." As Mr. Donnelly nodded and walked away, Jamal felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about creating space for growth and change. Back at school, Jamal threw himself into his studies with renewed vigor. He had always been a good student, but now he approached his education with a deeper appreciation for the power of knowledge. In his AP government class, he found himself drawing connections between the theoretical concepts they were studying and the practical experiences he'd had in effecting change at Brooksville High. One day, as he was leaving class, his teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, called him aside. "Jamal, I wanted to let you know that I've recommended you for the State Youth Leadership Conference this summer. After seeing your work with the council and your insights in class, I think you'd be an excellent candidate." Jamal felt a surge of excitement at the opportunity. The conference was known for bringing together promising young leaders from across the state, and he had heard amazing things about the workshops and networking opportunities it offered. "Thank you, Miss Rodriguez," he said, unable to keep the grin off his face. "I'd be honored to attend." As spring rolled around, Jamal found himself facing a new challenge, balancing his commitments to the council with his college preparation. SAT study sessions and college essay drafts vied for his attention alongside council meetings and initiative planning. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table surrounded by brochures from various universities, his father joined him, a steaming mug of tea in hand. "How's it going, son?" Mayor Harris asked, his eyes taking in the scattered papers and Jamal's furrowed brow. Jamal sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's a lot. I'm excited about college, but I'm also worried about what will happen with the council when I leave. We've made so much progress, and I don't want to see it all fall apart." Mayor Harris nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that feeling. But Jamal, what you've done at Brooksville High isn't about you alone. It's about the change you've inspired in others. The seeds you've planted will continue to grow long after you've graduated." As they talked, Jamal began to see his accomplishments in a new light. He realized that true leadership wasn't about being indispensable, but about empowering others to carry the torch forward. Energized by this realization, Jamal redoubled his efforts to mentor younger council members, sharing the lessons he'd learned and encouraging them to take on more responsibility. He worked with the school administration to ensure that the council's initiatives were sustainable, with clear plans for continuity in the years to come. As his senior year drew to a close, Jamal found himself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past 2 years. The school that had once felt like a battleground of hidden biases and unspoken tensions now buzzed with the energy of open dialogue and mutual respect. On the last day of classes, Jamal stood before the school assembly, tasked with giving a speech as the outgoing president of the Student Diversity and Inclusion Council. As he looked out at the sea of faces, students, teachers, and staff members of all backgrounds, he felt a swell of emotion. "2 years ago," he began, his voice strong and clear, "I stood in a classroom feeling small, feeling like my voice didn't matter. Today, I stand before you knowing that every voice in this room has the power to create change." As he spoke about the progress they'd made and the work still to be done, Jamal saw nods of agreement and looks of determination on the faces of his peers. He knew that the fight against prejudice and discrimination was far from over. But he also knew that Brooksville High was now better equipped to face these challenges head-on. "As I prepare to leave Brooksville High," Jamal concluded, "I'm not saying goodbye to this work. I'm saying thank you. Thank you for teaching me the true meaning of leadership, of community, and of the power we all have to make a difference. Let's continue to move forward together, creating a world where everyone's voice is heard and valued." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact Jamal and his fellow council members had made. As he stepped down from the podium, Jamal was engulfed in a sea of hugs and handshakes, words of gratitude and promises to carry on the work. In the weeks that followed, as Jamal prepared for college, he found himself filled with a mix of excitement and nostalgia. He had chosen a university known for its commitment to social justice, inspired by his experiences at Brooksville High to pursue a degree in public policy. On the evening before he was set to leave for college, Jamal took a walk through town with his father. As they passed by the high school, Mayor Harris turned to his son with a proud smile. "You know, Jamal," he said, "when I became mayor, I hoped to make a difference in this community. But watching you these past 2 years, seeing the change you've brought about, it's shown me that sometimes the most powerful movements start in the most unexpected places." Jamal nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without your support, Dad. And Moms, you both taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter how difficult it might be." As they continued their walk, Jamal felt a profound sense of gratitude for his parents, for the lessons he'd learned, and for the community that had supported him through this journey of growth and change. The next morning, as Jamal loaded the last of his boxes into the car, he took a final look at the house he'd grown up in, at the streets of Brooksville that had shaped him. He knew that he was leaving as a very different person from the boy who had once felt powerless in the face of injustice. As he climbed into the passenger seat, his mother leaned over to give him one last hug. "Remember, Jamal," she said softly, "no matter where you go or what you do, you have the power to make a difference. Never forget that." With those words echoing in his mind, Jamal set off towards his new adventure, carrying with him the lessons of the past and the hope for the future. He had learned that true power comes not from position or privilege, but from the courage to stand up for what's right and the commitment to lifting others as you rise. As Brooksville faded in the rearview mirror, Jamal felt a sense of excitement for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. He knew that the story that had begun in Mr. Donnelly's classroom was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning of a lifelong journey, a journey of growth, of leadership, and of creating positive change in the world around him. The road stretched out before him, full of promise and possibility, and Jamal Stevenson, once a quiet student afraid to speak up, now moved forward with confidence, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead and to continue being a voice for those who needed to be heard.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.